My name is Jolie Pettit and I'm the Director of Corporate Services and Corporate Affairs at the ARA. Our CEO, Caroline Wilkie, was planning to join you today, but has unfortunately lost her voice. She passes on her thanks for being part of this important discussion and for your support for Rail Safety Week. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. For me, here in Sydney, that's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to thank our ARA webinar series sponsor, Frauscher. Thank you very much for your continued support. As I'm sure you know, this week is Rail Safety Week. We've had a really strong response from industry this year, with more than 90 organisations taking part from across Australia and New Zealand. If you've been on social media this week, you would have seen the TrackSafe Foundation's new campaign being shared widely by the industry. The campaign encourages people to stand back, look up and stay rail safe on and around the rail network. It's a really great campaign and there are a range of resources available on the TrackSafe Foundation website if you'd like to share it and show your support. In recognition of Rail Safety Week, today's webinar will be a panel-based discussion on safety on the light rail network. As we all know, light rail networks by their very nature operate in a unique environment where both pedestrians and vehicles regularly interact with the rail infrastructure. Light rail's integration with a busy urban environment requires operators to have a strong focus on public safety in everything they do. In today's webinar, we've brought together a series of safety experts from light rail operators across the country to share their insights on the unique operational safety challenges that face light rail. We'll also discuss their work to engage the public on the importance of light rail safety. Now, we'd like to make this session as interactive as possible, so please post your questions at any time in the questions pane to the right of your screen. So as I mentioned, we have an impressive panel joining us today. I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce them to you. The first person joining us is Krystle Thompson. Krystle is the Safety and Systems Assurance Director of the ALTRAC Light Rail Consortium, which is responsible for the financing, design, construction, commissioning and operation of the Sydney Light Rail project. She has extensive investigations experience and a strong knowledge of work health and safety, rail safety, risk assurance and governance. Josef Brennan is the Chief Safety Officer at Yarra Trams. He's a passionate advocate for improving safety practices and performance and has experience in multiple industries across the UK, Latin America and Australia. During his time at Yarra Trams, Josef has driven significant improvements in operational safety, business and security resilience and risk management practices. He also led Yarra Trams' response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Cashman is responsible for health, safety, quality and environment at Torrens Connect in Adelaide. Chris has more than 25 years experience in the design, implementation and certification of health, safety, environment and quality management systems that have been independently recognised as world-class. He's devoted much of his working life to the achievement of outstanding safety performance across a wide range of industry groups. So a really impressive panel to lead our discussion today. Now, before we get started, I'd like to set the scene by sharing a video provided by Sydney Light Rail.
We still see so many instances where people are stepping out in front of our trams, not looking where they're going, or cyclists cycling across tram lines, which are very dangerous. So the message is, stand back, look up, stay rail safe. It is so important during this Rail Safety Week to make sure that you don't try and run down escalators, upstairs, or rush onto a train. There are many services out there. Wait for the next one.
Well, there's some pretty sobering scenes in that, and it certainly highlights why today's discussion is so important. Now, before we get started, just another reminder that you can submit a question at any time in the questions pane to the right of your screen. So please make the most of that, and we will get to as many questions as we can today. To get things underway, I'd like to ask each of our panellists to provide some opening remarks with a brief overview of their light rail operations, as well as their observations on the most common or significant safety issues for their network and how they're being addressed. So Krystle, perhaps if we can start with you.
Thanks, Jolie, for the introduction and the opportunity to be here today. As you can see from the video clip that you just played, some of the key issues that we see in Sydney light rail and in fact, all light rail networks is that interaction between the light rail vehicle and the public, particularly road motor vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists. So that's where we see our biggest issues. We've also seen some problems with slip, trips and falls at platform edges. So since opening, what we've done is we've actually had to paint the platform edges yellow and black to try and help counteract this. Probably one of the most successful initiatives that we've had to date is we have a weekly forum with Transport for New South Wales where we review near misses and incidents and things that happen in that week, and we propose safety improvements to happen on the network. So that's probably been really successful initiative to drive those safety improvements. The Sydney light rail network is set up as the Inner West light rail and then the newly configured CSCLR. So the Inner West light rail network, which is L1, is basically an old heavy rail corridor. So it's a very different risk context for us there versus the CSCLR, which is predominantly on-street running. So that's where we see the majority of our incidents occur. Look, we're a relatively new network, so we're still trying to bed in that public safety awareness campaign. And I think the stop-start of COVID and the lockdowns probably hasn't helped that for us.
Yeah, it's certainly challenging the industry in many different ways at the moment. Josef, did you want to provide some opening remarks?
Sure. So I'll just give a bit of context about Yarra Trams, first of all. So we operate on 250 kilometres of double track. We operate out of 9 depots, and there's approximately around about 500 trams divided into 9 different tram classes. We deliver 5,000 trips per day, and we operate on a network that's 75% shared with other road users. And throughout that network, we've got about 1,700 tram stops as well. So with that, there's a lot of stopping and starting to come to the stops. We've also got traffic lights and then traffic congestion, which is required for us to stop and start continuously. Every time we do that, there's a risk of a passenger falling. So it's ultimately important that people hold on, and there's lots of education campaigns that we've run for that. And also we train our drivers on the smooth acceleration and deacceleration. That interface, same as what Krystle's been sharing in Sydney, is very much the same here in Yarra Trams. Vehicles, pedestrians, continuously presenting a risk on the network, and our interface with them needs to be continually managed. Another risk that we don't often think about is electrical risk. So we have collisions with our overhead from trucks and also in bridges as well. So we've had 16 of those. So it's an ongoing risk, and we try to warn trucks coming into the areas in which we've got lower overhead going into those low level bridges. There's a lot of education that's needed for both passengers, the road users, and as I say, we're heavily dependent upon the performance of our drivers. So the training's key to our controls as well.
Thanks, Josef. And it's interesting you've picked up on a few different safety issues there, which shows the complexity for light rail operators. Chris, would you like to provide an introduction for Torrens Connect?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jolie. AMO was, or Torrens Connect is contracted by the South Australian Department for Infrastructure and Transport to provide tram operations and maintenance services for the Adelaide tram network, as well as manage the rail infrastructure that goes with that. We're quite a small operation compared to Krystle and Josef's environment. So we've got about 17 kilometres of standard gauge track running from Glenelg in the west through to the entertainment centre in the Adelaide CBD. We've got about 33 platforms, 17 crossover points located along the alignment, and we operate in a shared as well as a closed rail corridor. We only have 24 trams in the fleet, 100 series Flexity trams and 200 series Citadis trams. But we do have some challenges in this. Our network infrastructure is reasonably old. We have 5 different types of signalling systems that drivers have to negotiate, and our platforms are only very basic. Some of the things that we're confronted with is, I think it's sort of getting worse as we've moved through this COVID pandemic, through the different phases of lockdown and release and so forth. We have a lot of security and crime related issues. Vandalism's on the increase, assaults are on the increase, people trespassing in the rail corridor and the closed corridor anyway. It's on the increase, lots of disorderly behaviour. And only last month we had four instances of people throwing objects at trams. So it's quite a challenge. We do respond to this through meetings with SAPOL. I know our General Manager, Magda Robertson, is actively engaged with SAPOL in trying to curb the behaviour. We have our customer service officers that are fitted with body cams. That sort of helps while they're present on the trams. We have a private security provider engaged by the client to provide additional support for us, and we do lots of interactions out in the field with our customer base. But that pretty much sums up an overview of Torrens Connect.
Thanks, Chris. And it is concerning to hear about those incidents of antisocial behaviour on the network, particularly during the pandemic as well. Josef, I might just pick up on that with you. I mean, you've worked through a series of lockdowns in Victoria. How have you seen that impact antisocial behaviour? What sort of strategies have you been putting in place to manage that on the network?
Yeah, it was an issue for us, particularly last year during the long lockdown that we had here in Melbourne, and not just on the tram network as well. It was a cross-industry forum that was set up, and what we were experiencing was the same in bus and in heavy rail as well. It's at that same time as well, the police were extremely stretched, and there was a lot high demand on them to support the lockdown and the controls that were in place there. However, despite that demand on them, we will able to partner with them on some targeted locations that we know that this antisocial or security related behaviour was occurring. And with that, we had a presence with our AOs, with the police, that was demonstrating both to our employees, but also to the public as well, that it's safe to go out and use trams when they needed to, because they were very often essential workers during that phase as well.
And touching on other lockdown impacts, Krystle, you're operating obviously in a pretty dense urban environment, and I imagine in lockdown we're all doing more online shopping, we're ordering in more because we can't go out, and that's probably putting more trucks and cyclists on the road for deliveries. Has that changed how you're operating or how you're responding to safety issues that comes with interactions with those sorts of motorists on the road?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, we actually opened L3, which is our most recent line during the COVID pandemic last year. And sort of what we found when restrictions started to ease, we actually found that there was a bit of a spike in those near miss incidents and collisions on the network. And we attribute that to people almost forgetting some of the public awareness campaign that we had, drummed into them before we opened up, because there was such a long break in between, and because we are that new network. So it was really important for us to recognise that and start that public education again. In terms of delivery cyclists, that's been a huge issue for us, to be honest. We do see a lot of them out on the network, and they do use our tram corridor to travel around for those deliveries. So we really saw that spike happen during the pandemic, and what we did to address that is our safety and our comms team, in conjunction with Transport for New South Wales, we actually developed a safety video and we put it on YouTube, and we sent that link out to Deliveroo and Uber Eats, and really tried to sell that message to them about safety around the light rail environment. And it showed some near misses and collision footage, but it also reinforced some positive safety behaviours and provided tips to those drivers, which was hopefully helped kind of address that hazard on the network.
And that sounds like a very specific public education campaign for a quite targeted group. But Obviously, in Rail Safety Week, we're talking about public education and awareness across the rail network generally. That's something I imagine with light rail happens quite regularly, given the level of interaction that you have with pedestrians and motorists in the course of your everyday operations. Chris, what sort of campaigns have you seen work effectively, and what are the key things that you think really do drive success in changing behaviour in that regard?
Yeah, the issue of people getting into the rail corridor is a challenge for everybody. There's no doubt about it. We have the same sort of issues here, although we're a lot smaller operation. We are operating through the CBD of a capital city, and not everyone is paying attention. We've had our share of near miss events, and a couple of people stepping out into the path of an oncoming tram, and some of that is quite disturbing. But we're also proactive. We know it's like water running down a driveway. You've got to keep on the squeegee to keep it out of the garage. So there's no difference with this rail awareness for members of the public. So we've met with the RAA, which is the Royal Automobile Association in South Australia, and we're working together with them to put together an awareness campaign that captures some of the video footage from CCTV cameras that they can convert into an advertisement. We also meet with local schools along the rail corridor, particularly with the principals and the teachers, so that they can continually reinforce messages of rail safety with the students. There's one thing when you've got young children coming out of school. Their peripheral vision is not quite fully formed until they're about 16, so they don't actually see things out the corner of their eye like an adult would. So, that you have to be extra vigilant with the young children coming out of school, and trying to catch trams home and do that safely, all while at the same time they're active on their mobile phones and they're not really paying that much attention. So we meet regularly with the schools to keep those messages of safety awareness in front of the kids. We've also got a couple of disability service providers that are along the rail corridor, various degrees of disabilities within their client portfolios, and there's a couple of times our drivers have reported seeing one of the clients from these service providers and probably not standing where they should be. So we promptly went down and had a meeting with the service provider just to make sure that they were aware of what happens to their clients after they've left the premises and they're looking to catch trams. So that was most effective. We haven't had any more reports of the disability service provider clients at risk, which has been good. So they've taken that on board. We also meet with larger organisations that are along the rail corridor. Just one that comes to mind is the Royal Adelaide Hospital, which is in town. We have staff on short breaks that want to come out from the hospital, cross a busy CBD road with a rail corridor in the middle of it, and not really that patient in terms of waiting for the pedestrian light cycles to change. So they were sort of coming out and just dashing across between gaps in cars and then gaps in trams, and it wasn't going to take too long before some of these essential workers were going to end up in hospital as patients. So we went down to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, met with the Director of Nursing and personnel, and sort of raised our concerns and worked with them to try and keep it in the front of their staff minds about what the implications are for not waiting at the pedestrian crossing for the light sequences so that you can cross safely, but pulling the handle on the poke machine and dashing like Frogger between cars and trams. Ultimately, we don't want people hurt. We don't want to see our drivers involved in any of those incidents, because the impact is on them as well, not just the person that's been potentially knocked over. So the nursing staff and that have been marvellous. They've responded really well, and I think it's that level of engagement that we pride ourselves on. here at Torrens Connect that helps keep people safe, and we'll continue to do that. Obviously, the work is never done. It's a constant effort, but picking your mark to get the most bang for your time as well is probably pretty helpful.
And Joseph, both Krystle and Chris have mentioned quite specific and targeted campaigns around particular groups or particular concerns in terms of approaching safety education. Is it very much not a one size fits all for this kind of thing? Do you have to really be aware of the different safety concerns and change your approach to influence the change in behaviour?
Very much so. So at Yarra Trams, there's been a number of different campaigns targeting a different audience. The very famous Rhino campaign that I think has been taken globally and used in other operations. But more recently, we had a tram coach campaign. So that was targeting people on board and how to stand safely holding on. And it really targeted, went on to the second phase of that, was targeting the demographic that we know is most affected by our falls, which is those over 60. There was a high campaign during the Elderly Week, and there was actual characters that were built up into the campaign that were directly wanting to relate to people, so they could see themselves and understand how they should be holding on, sitting down safely when they're using the tram. So that was really effective. More recently than that, again, we've brought out our Trams Can't Swerve. So we actually injure more passengers avoiding a collision than from when we actually do from a collision, which is a really interesting piece of data that we've got. And the Trams Can't Swerve was targeting towards the road users to make them more aware of the fact that when they pull out in front of the tram, then we need to use the brakes, and that has an impact to the passengers who are using the tram. During COVID, what we seen was there was a huge reduction in the amount of people using public transport. But the frequency rate of our falls actually went up during that period. And we attributed this to the behaviours of people during that time. And a lot of the messaging during COVID continues to be, don't touch things that you don't need to. So therefore, there was a hesitation from our passengers to not hold on like is necessary. We then ran some targeted campaigns through our internal AVM system on the trams. And now there's actually some great messaging coming through, which is on the radios about, people need to hold on and the dangers of using the trams. So it's a continuous cycle that we need to keep fresh and can look at what the risks are, how it's changing, and ways to keep it relatable to the audience as well.
And it's interesting, that observation about how people's behaviour changes due to outside factors that you may not anticipate. So it is interesting to see how you're responding there. If we look at this from the other point of view, Krystle, I mean, Sydney Light Rail have shared that footage, which includes some pretty close calls, which I imagine from a staff perspective as a driver or a customer service operator must be quite scary to be witnessing. How are you talking about this with your teams?
Yeah, so I think, communication is key. Obviously, we have a really good reporting culture with our drivers, so we encourage them to let us know what's happening out there on the network. They're obviously our ears and eyes out there and can report these hazards or near misses so that we can kind of trend and respond to that. So I think that that's really important, is to be able to adapt to that. We post a lot of things on we have a sort of a Transdev app, and we keep up to date with that, and we're constantly refreshing our training. But I think Chris touched on it earlier. The important thing is that safety and well-being of your staff. We worry about obviously the person that's, the public, the member of public that's been involved in the incident, but it really does have that lasting effect on our drivers and our other CSOs or other people that have witnessed it, but particularly the drivers. So we really need to ensure that we support them throughout that process and really look after them, I guess, because, they can be quite rattled after the incident.
And Chris, safety starts with culture in any organisation. How are you looking at safety from a staff perspective to make sure that culture is really embedded across the network?
Yeah, so safety culture is something that's I'm passionate about, because it basically drives your performance. If you've got a really good safety culture in your working environment, then you will have really good performance in a range of areas, not just the reduction of incidents, but also you get a lot more engagement with people. So there's a few things that we're doing. We've implemented zero harm safety culture training here, which is a program built around safety psychology principles that gives people a first-hand experience about some of the limitations of the Mark I human brain. So I take them through a bit of a journey there and give them experience about losing situational awareness and, you know, the important role that peripheral vision plays, and how to overcome motion-induced blindness and things like that, all of which are physiological outcomes based on, you know, how the brain works. And if you understand, you know, how people work and how people think, then you're able to put some programs and initiatives and provide some awareness to them about how they can manage that better, so that you get that reduction in human error, which is often a contributing factor to incidents. And we take a holistic view of culture. You know, it's not just about the people, but it's also about the systems and the environment, and all of those combine constantly throughout the day to give people that cultural experience. And, you know, some workplaces are good and some workplaces are not so good. And, you know, I think the workplaces that are probably leading the way in this have really good support for their people, really good training programs, and open and honest reporting culture. You know, the systems are simple and aimed at the people that are supposed to work with them. So, you know, keeping your documents as simple as possible, targeted to the audience that's supposed to read them and follow them. And then the working environment, which is, you know, something that's always a work in progress. The physical environment changes over time, and you need to keep vigilant about what's going on in that environment and what actually can be improved. So we underpin that with good workplace inspection regimes and auditing practices to make sure that our environment's as good as it possibly can be. We also do surveys so that we can get a gauge on, or a bit of a pulse check, if you like, about, you know, what people are thinking, and, you know, what some of the things that are important to them and that they would like to see improved. And, you know, so we measure, you know, our survey has 8 elements to it. It's around commitment, how people perceive the commitment of the organisation to safety. Behaviours, what sort of behaviours are people seeing in the workplace that are positive, and, you know, some that probably need to be corrected. We get a gauge on the levels of trust amongst the workforce as well. You know, is it the same across all departments and all teams, or is there some nuances going on there? We are actively asked for their opinions on our procedures. Do they find that they're easy to use? They cover the right areas in the right depth, and have the right content. Engagement, levels of engagement. I know at Torrens Connect we are massive on engagement. It's one of the key success factors, I think, for the organisation's efforts, is, you know, how well people are engaged, and keeping that ongoing. It's constant effort. We also measure peer group attitude, like how do they feel within their peer groups. You know, is there good reporting culture? Does everyone seem to know what they're doing? Do people do the right thing even when no one's watching? And we also measure resources. Do we have enough things in place to support people in all the aspects of the work that need support? And our reporting culture. Obviously, if we're not finding out about it, we can't respond to it. So reporting's a big part for us. I think, you know, when you underpin that with the safety psychology training around zero harm, it's not just it's more than just a slogan. Zero harm for us is something that's achievable just through choice, and giving the information to people so that they can make better choices is, I think, critical to contribute to a positive safety culture.
And in the last year or so, where there's been a lot of uncertainty, particularly for the frontline workers, I imagine safety culture has been front and centre more than ever. Josef, have you seen any changes in how you're approaching safety with your teams during this period?
One of the things that we've made an intended effort to do is open lines of communication. So during the pandemic last year, well, at the height of it here in Melbourne, there was regular sessions with leadership and open to all employees, so we can give that direct communication through to them on what was happening. They understood the changes that were coming into an effect. It's an area that we are focusing on as well, bringing in just culture into our organisation at the moment now. So we are currently developing a model which will be trialled, and then we'll look at applying a consistent way of determining error in the business so that we can improve our systems so that error doesn't lead to the severe consequences which it sometimes can.
And look, we are getting a few questions through, so just a reminder, if you have any questions, to pop them in the questions pane on the right hand of your screen. We will be picking them up as we go through this conversation, so pop them in at any time. I just wanted to shift the focus a little bit to technology and innovation. And Josef, perhaps if we stay with you, are there any new innovations or new approaches that you're trialling or adopting to improve safety measures on the network?
Yeah, quite a few. So Yarra Trams is part of Keolis down a rail, and they have an innovation team at the platform level as well. And Keolis, who are a public transport operator all over the world, are continually trialing and looking at different technology that can improve safety outcomes. So we work with the extended business to see what has been effective in other operations. Not always does that translate to an effective innovation or technology for the Melbourne tram network. To give an example of that, there was a technology called red carpet, which is a beam that goes about 15 metres ahead of the tram to warn people that the tram's approaching. When we brought that over to a prototype here, it just wasn't able to be installed onto particularly our older fleet of trams. There is a technology which is getting some positive feedback at the moment about linking the gong to the lights. So road users and pedestrians will both have an audible and a visual alert when the tram is needing to communicate with them. So that's promising, and I'll see how that progresses over in France and see if that's something that we may be able to introduce here. We have just completed a trial with Bombardier on one of our E-Class trams with collision avoidance technology. So there's been quite a lot of debate about how effective this could be in the Melbourne tram network, given the 75% shared network environment and the interfaces that we have, and how distracting those alerts could be for the driver from this technology. So the best way to know how effective that will be to trial it, which is what we've done. So the report on that is due shortly, and I'd be interested to see how that could be potentially applied more broadly. And quite excitingly as well, we're just partnering with Lexus, who are, whereas the ODUS was focusing on the tram, Lexus are looking at a technology that the car can communicate with road infrastructure, and included in that is the trams as well. So there's always modern advances that are being made, and it's important that we look to these, and when it seems feasible to bring a trial in.
We've had a question actually come through about innovation and talking about picking up on your remarks, Krystle, around delivery drivers and cyclists. Have you been looking at any innovations in signalling or train control systems that can help address those risks when they're entering the light rail vehicle corridors?
Not that I'm aware of in terms of signalling stuff, but I know that we are very early stages of a trial in terms of cyclist safety and basically putting something in the rail. Obviously, there was an issue in Newcastle where there was an unfortunate death as a result of a cyclist falling over there in the tracks. So We are in the process, very early stages of trialling something which we'll do in our depot to cover the tracks there to see if that helps in terms of the cyclist interface there. So that's probably an innovation that I can think of in terms of improving cyclist safety.
And Chris, how about you? Are there any innovations that you're looking at or that you think show promise for improving safety outcomes on the network?
I think the thing that I'm probably most excited about, and it's, you know, it's not as sexy as some of the stuff that is going on, but our platforms at the moment, we've got a big push to get them upgraded. You know, so there's duress alarms and proper signage and proper lighting and CCTV cameras. So our platforms have none of that at the moment. And I know our head of customer experience is working diligently with the client with, you know, proposals going forward about how we can upgrade these platforms to make them safe for all patrons at all times of day and night. So that's something I'm really looking forward to, because I think, you know, when people know that they're on CCTV camera, their behaviours can obviously be adjusted, you know, to suit that, and having call points at these platforms for a response. So if someone is in trouble, there is something there that can activate and get help relatively quickly. So, you know, I really like that. We're at the moment also looking at getting some virtual reality training in place for tram operators, so that, you know, we can throw different scenarios at them in a safe environment and provide that coaching, so that, you know, their skills are always on the improve. So I'm looking forward to the outcomes of that as well. Other things we're trying to do basically along our network, because we got so many different types of signaling systems and some of it's pretty old. We're getting a human factors assessment done of the tram network, so that we can get some recommendations from subject matter experts about how we might simplify things for the tram operators who've got a very difficult job to do along a shared corridor in the CBD with lots of stuff going on. And if we can remove some complexity and cognitive overloading on the tram operators, I think we'll also get a better outcome. There's three examples that I'm pretty keen to see land at Torrens Connect.
Well, it's pretty clear from what overview you've all given, there's a lot happening in terms of education and prevention across all of your networks. Krystle, the fact is, though, that sometimes safety incidents do occur. And when that does happen, what's your view about the best way to respond to a safety incident, and what sort of challenges do you experience in those cases?
Yeah, so I think communication is obviously key in any sort of safety incident, and the command and control that's on site. Usually there's, depending on the severity, there's multiple agencies that attend. So that obviously comes along with complexity in terms of who's in charge and who does what role and responsibility. So for us, it's really crucial that we ensure that there is emergency training and exercises that happen ongoing. Obviously, before we opened, we had an extensive testing and commissioning phase where we had a whole lot of tests that we needed to do in scenarios just to make sure that everyone was comfortable. And I think the more that you get comfortable doing it and the more that you attend these incidents, the better you become. It's certainly important for us to conduct lessons learned, particularly after serious incidents, you know, to get together, review what worked well and ensure that we do that next time, but also what didn't work well, and check our procedures and processes. And look, as I touched on before, probably the key point is just managing that safety and well-being of the staff after an incident, and ensuring that they've got the support that they need.
And Joseph, for you, are there any key learnings from responding to incidents that you've drawn?
Yeah, very similar. So we have a high number of incidents on the tram network. So there are on average about 3 collisions with vehicles a day. So thankfully, not all of them lead to serious outcomes. But what we want to do is learn from the ones that we can, so we can put improved systems in place to prevent them occurring again. When it's a very severe consequence, immediately we're aware of this. So we've got an incident management team that get activated, and they will respond immediately to the scene. And then depending upon the potential, there'll also be a crisis team that can get activated, which will then manage the longer term impacts to that incident. Thankfully, we don't have to activate the crisis management team too often, although it does happen. And when after these events, we complete a proper review and improve not just what our arrangements are to avoid the incidents happening, but how effective we were in responding as well.
And Krystle, you touched a little bit in that about the training that goes in before you start work. Obviously, the other area where training is really important is with new drivers coming onto the network. What are the key considerations that you need to make sure are in place when you're training new drivers with respect to safety?
Yeah, so I mean, we can't understate, like, training is just so important. And I think for us, it's just that continuous process. It is important to have things in place when they come on board, and we do certain testing to make sure that the driver's suitable to the role, sort of safety testing, psychometric testing. So all of that stuff is really important. But for us, we were lucky enough to have the same testing and commissioning drivers used sort of throughout that testing phase, and they were able to find out a lot about the network, and they basically helped us build that training package that's delivered to drivers, which I think was invaluable. And basically they created like a line manual across the network to show where there were hotspots or incidents or issues that needed to be called out in driver training. So I think that really set the drivers up to know where the key issues were on the network. And as Josef said earlier, we have to be mindful and really drive into the drivers' education, how important it is, their reactions, and what can happen to the passengers on board. An emergency brake application, or if they take off too fast from a platform or come in too fast, we really need to be mindful of the slips that can happen on board and the impacts of that. But for us, it's just, like I say, that ongoing process. I mean, if we see an emerging trend for our drivers, when we first opened up, we had a lot of light rail tram authority exceedances, which is essentially proceeding without authority, SPAD in a heavy rail term. We saw a lot of those, and we saw some wrong side door opening incidents. So in order to sort of drive those human error incidents down, we created specific training packages to target those problem areas. And, that's been really successful. We've had I think we're at 50 days without a wrong side door and 60 days without a latte on our network, which is absolutely huge. We haven't seen any results like that before, and we believe that's from the dedicated training sessions that we're holding.
It sounds like that's a very targeted process as well. And Chris, you mentioned before that you are doing a series of engagement surveys and other points where you touch base with staff, in the course of their day-to-day work. Training isn't just a one-off, is it? It's a continued process. Are you seeing that as a real focus for your teams?
Yeah, I think just to emphasise what Josef and Krystle have said about the effort that's needed to support drivers and making sure that you're constantly improving all aspects in the measures that support drivers. We go through a consultative process with elected health and safety representatives and other team members, where we review what's been going on for a set period of time, and we take a deeper dive into some of these events with the view to maybe making improvements in some areas like training packages and materials. One change that comes to mind is we had a look at the latte events, like Krystle was talking about, the Tram Authority Exceed. So we have our share of those as well. And everyone was pulling their hair out about what can we do to stop this, because it's all human error. And we had a look at the training we delivered, and when we deliver mindfulness training and defensive driving and reinforcing those messages, that was sort of pretty early on in the training package, about week 2 or week 3. And the new tram operators, the trainees, actually didn't get into a tram until week 5. And we thought perhaps that 3-week delay between when they got the information and when they're actually going to use it might be a contributing factor to people not, perhaps applying those principles. So we had a look at the scheduling about when we're delivering different modules of the training to support what we're trying to achieve out on the track. So we moved that mindfulness training and defensive driver training to, basically the day before they get in the driver's cab for the first time. The other things we checked was, when you're sort of unpacking an incident and you're doing your interviews and collecting your evidence and all that sort of thing, we asked people, what do they think could have prevented the incident, and often they come out with the solutions quite. They know what the solutions are, and it's working with them to find the best way to implement those solutions. Other times people said that they understood what defensive driving was, and when you question them, you're getting 1,000 different answers. So, it's sort of like drive to conditions. I mean, what does that mean? What do we really want people to do in order to demonstrate they are driving to conditions? So we come up with the 5 golden rules for defensive driving, which, if they can tick these 5 boxes every moment of every day, then we know they are driving defensively. That's been a big help too, because it simplifies things with people. They've got something that they can mentally focus on and concentrate on. Also got in-cab behaviours going on, which is common in heavy rail, and I know it's sort of started in Japan, but calling out signals to yourself, and then behaving, pointing, and to make sure that you've taken the right response. And we've got another, we have these subcommittees set up that they make recommendations, and we just keep going through these recommendations to refine them and prioritise them and work with the operations team to see what can be implemented and the best way to do that. So it's a never-ending job, but the effort pays off in the reward, because you get fewer incidents, you got fewer people getting harmed. You've got people happier in the work environment. They're getting more satisfaction out of driving the tram and working for Torrens Connect. So yeah, the whole thing basically is a team effort. It's not, it's not Chris has the answer to everything. I'm not the font of all wisdom. It's about working together and pitching at people's strengths, making sure that we are sort of all aligned and we're all got the common purpose. And it's all day, every day, even when no one's watching, which I think is a great outcome.
It's a really great outcome, and it's good to see that continued focus. Josef, you mentioned before some unique challenges with the pandemic, things like, passengers not wanting to hold on, having to communicate to staff when information is changing and there's a lot of uncertainty coming. There will be a time, hopefully in the near future, when people are coming back to rail. What sort of safety challenges are you anticipating as patronage increases again, back to perhaps where it was a couple of years ago?
Well, first of all, we need to overcome the challenge of getting people back onto the network as well. And I think safety is an important part of that, particularly with some of the technology that Chris was mentioning about, which will help people feeling safe to come back onto the tram network. We mentioned the antisocial or the security issues that were very prominent during the lockdown. So first of all, we need to bring those passengers back and then make sure that they're feeling safe whilst travelling. And I think technology's got a part to play in that. How people can, first of all, be informed of when the trams are arriving, if there's any delays. So I think passenger information is key to that. And then also, if they are on board and they experiencing some of these issues that we know have occurred, how they can raise an alarm and be supported should they need it immediately or within the next few minutes as well. So that's going to be something that I think we need to, as an industry, look to, creating that feeling of safety so people are safe on the network. Beyond the typical rail safety type of incidents that we're talking about today, which is collisions and passenger falls and head knockdown.
Yes, and certainly the industry has been doing a lot to keep those services operating safely through the pandemic, but it will be good to see that confidence as more people return to the network over time when the time is right. Krystle, for you, I suppose Sydney Light Rail has introduced new lines sort of in the midst of all of this. As you start to see people go back to the office and back to normal work patterns and there's more people on the network, are you anticipating that you might need to shift focus in how you're communicating about rail safety around light rail?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as I touched on earlier, when we did see that break for a while, we did see that spike. So we are sort of anticipating that, and we will obviously be briefing our drivers. Communication's key, obviously, to make sure that they're aware of what issues are happening out there. And I think it's vital for us to, as an industry, just get out that information as much as we can. So we're constantly sharing some of the videos, like the clips that you showed earlier, making sure that, you know, Howard and Transport for New South Wales are talking positively about safety and the good behaviours that people should be displaying out there. I think, you know, one of the issues that I see in light rail is from a very young age where sort of it's heavily drummed into us about, you know, heavy rail and the risks associated with heavy rail, but I don't feel that as an industry yet we've quite achieved that same mentality when it comes to light rail. So I think it's really important that we all work together, and things like Rail Safety Week and these conversations are obviously going to help that. But I think there's a real long way to go until people start seeing the risks associated with light rail the same as heavy rail as well.
And Krystle's made a really good point there that there are very different risk contexts for light rail versus heavy rail. If you wanted to get across, you know, particular issues that people should be really mindful of when interacting with the light rail network as opposed to other forms of rail, what would you be focusing on?
Well, if I could, you know, have a silver bullet or a magic wand or some pixie dust, I think I'd, you know, try to keep the public safe. And when they're entering or passing through the corridor, pedestrian crossings, I mean, a lot of people on mobile phones, they've got no situational awareness at all. Other people got their headphones on, listening to the music, and they're just simply not paying enough attention. I think anything we can do in that space would be really good. And then you've got the security and, you know, crime sort of stuff, which seems to be increasing. I mean, 60% of our incidents are associated with these sort of security and crime events that are happening, you know, on platforms, on trams, and the vandalism and the assaults and all the stuff that goes in that nasty space. So if I could, you know, wave a magic wand and make those things go away, I think the whole network would be safer. Particularly, I'm concerned about, you know, now everyone's sort of coming out of these lockdowns. They're full of energy, full of beans, and if they can just stop and think before they act, that would be great, particularly around the schools coming out or children getting to and from school. And we, you know, the passengers on board with the slip, trips and falls, I think we're active in that space. We have a campaign that there's a little koala gripping onto a tree, you know, to try and encourage people to hang on while they're on board. And, you know, like Josef was saying, it's, you know, the elderly passengers that are at most risk, and they seem to be the most reluctant to hang on. I don't know whether they're fighting an identity crisis going on about that, but, you know, you have conversations with them and they tell you they're all right, and you know that the tram could break at any time and they won't be all right. So, you know, anything we can do in that space would be good. But, you know, if we can get some of this disorderly behaviour and miscreant behaviour out of the network, that'd be helpful. And if we can get people to pay attention around the rail corridor, that would be helpful, because it's, you know, the rail safety stuff and the road safety stuff, all part of the same issue. Cars, pedestrians, push bikes, motorbikes, trucks, all driving on a road near a rail corridor, and, you know, it's the same thing. Anything that we can do to prevent that would be great.
And Josef, if you could give the public one key safety message for when they're dealing with the light rail network, what would it be?
I'd ask them to be courteous towards our employees. The message is very strong. We talk about a lot of the, you know, being aware around it, but our drivers, our customer service, our authorised officers are just out there doing a job, and they're doing it through some turbulent times through the past 12 months. And we've just recently ran a campaign, or led by WorkSafe, in which some of our employees shared some experiences of interactions they've had on the tram network, which were quite confronting. So my message would be to, you know, be courteous, be respectful to the risks that are out there, and just to take care.
I think that's a very good point, and it's been really good to see the Be Kind campaign through the pandemic. You know, it is really essential work that your workers are doing, and they're doing it in very difficult circumstances. So I think that is a really important message to note today. Krystle, if you had one key thing that you would like to share, what would it be?
Yeah, mine would be pretty simple. It'd be heads up around light rail and ditch the distractions. As Chris said earlier, you know, every time we watch the footage playback and we see what people are doing, they're just not paying attention. I mean, we're all in our phones, we're all just going about our business and not aware of our surroundings, and we really can see some serious incidents out there. So for me, it's heads up around light rail and ditch the distractions.
And Chris, any final remarks from you?
No, but I'd just like to say, I think, you know, I'm fairly new to light rail. I've got some heavy rail experience, but I'm fairly new to light rail, and it is definitely not the same. And just to underline what Krystle was saying, I think I would like to see, you know, through conferences like this where light rail is given the same amount of attention as heavy rail, knowing that we are not the same. There are different risk profiles, there are different challenges that face light rail organisations to heavy rail organisations, and you know, the safety is important. And I just think that anything we can do, like this conference, for example, where we're openly talking about what's going on and what we're doing to try and improve things, is a help. And I'd sort of, you know, thank you for the opportunity to be a participant in it and contribute in any small way that I can.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to our panellists for your time today. I think Krystle's advice to ditch the distractions and be aware of your surroundings is very much in keeping with the Rail Safety Week message. So we really appreciate your insights on this very important issue. And thank you to those of you that joined us today and engaged in the Q&A. Your involvement is greatly appreciated. You will receive a short feedback survey after today's webinar, so I encourage you to complete that so we can keep improving the webinars that we are providing for you. We also have a number of webinars scheduled over the coming weeks as we look to provide more opportunities for you to connect online while some of us are in lockdown and unable to move around a little bit. So do look out for those. Our next webinar will be held on Wednesday, the 25th of August, when we will launch the ARA's new sustainability strategy. So I encourage you to jump on our website and register for the next webinar and look at what's coming up ahead. Once again, thank you to Frasha, who sponsored the ARA's webinar series, and to our fantastic panellists for joining us today. Have a lovely afternoon and stay safe.